Okay, I think we'll go ahead and start. Welcome everyone to today's session. My name's Jeff Smith. I'm here with my coworker and fellow product manager, Brian Spindolini. We're here to talk about all of the database tools that we build to help you take advantage of the Oracle database's JSON features. On this title slide, there's a picture. Use your phone to scan that, and it'll take you to that bit.ly link. That's good for a special offer today, a larger than normal amount of credits that you can use to sign up for the Oracle Cloud and start kicking the tires on some services. I just want to spend a second explaining the difference between that and using the always free services, like for example, the always free autonomous database JSON service that's available. If you sign up for an always free JSON service, you'll get a single OCPU. You'll get a limited amount of storage for relational data in that service, but it's full functionality. And you can definitely use that as sort of a trial. If you want to do like a performance or real world performance or proof of concept test, then you might want to actually move over into the trial tendency, and that's good for 30 days. And the credits there allow you to consume a specific amount of resources in the Oracle Cloud. And also, not to confuse you, this can be used for anything in the Oracle Cloud domain, not just what we're talking about today. All right, and if you're seeing this as a recording, that link should still work. You may just, and you'll still get those credits to use.
Yeah, just to add though, but if you do use that account and you bring up always free services within this account that you're getting from this link here, they will continue to work after the credits do expire. I have a personal one. It's where I build all my labs that we have that we're going to be talking about today from. So so my experience with it is the same as yours. So you just go there, you get the credits, and you're ready to go. And again, any always free things that you create in this account will automatically continue to work after the credits do expire. So there you go.
Thank you very much, sir.
Go for it, Jeff. It's all
you folks should also know you don't have to use the Oracle Cloud to take advantage of these features. Everything I'm showing you today is also available for an Oracle on-premises database installation. And we'll go over some of the details of that. Of course, the beauty of cloud is nothing for you to manage. You can just go into your browser, click it on, and use it as you need, and we'll take care of everything else. All right, so into the show. So this session is also a nice excuse for us to welcome into the world a brand new lab that you can use to teach yourself all of the technology discussed in today's session. So if you go to the Oracle Live Labs page and do a search on JSON, this was published yesterday. And it's got this same sort of choose your path where you can go and import JSON documents into relational tables and use SQL against them, or you can import them as documents in a JSON collection and use the SOTA query by example APIs against those documents. So again, you might want to take a picture of this slide. And if you missed that, I've got this link at the end of the talk as well.
And I put the link in the chat. So if you open up your Zoom chat and just go ahead and click on the link that I just posted, you'll be taken straight to the lab.
Man, it's like I got my own presentation consigliere with me. It's beautiful. I try. Yeah. Everything, 95% of everything I'm showing you today will be based on this lab. Now, we're not going to walk the lab in today's session. I'm going to go over the content, explain to you what some of the concepts are, how that could be applied. And then the idea is once you go and jump into this lab, it's not going to be, all brand new to you, and you'll have no idea of where we're coming from, where we're trying to get you to. If at the end I can manage to stop myself talking long enough, Brian might take you through just the first few steps of the live lab. But they're very easy to follow through. And again, they're very easy to take. On the very front page, you'll be asked, hey, do you want to spin up one of these trials? In which case, you've got those credits that you would use. What I would say is, launch the always free workshop that gets you in an always free tenancy, it never goes away. Or if you already have an Oracle 19c or higher database with Oracle REST data services on that database installed, then you could say run on your own tenancy. And really all that does is it just opens up the web pages for you to browse the content. There just won't be a database associated with it. All right. So I'm kind of dating myself here a little bit with the idea of this session. If you remember, well, at least when I was a kid, the library had dozens of these books where you could, read the books over and over again and get almost a different story out of it every time. And that kind of applies to the technology we're talking about today, because when you're presented with data in a JSON document, I'm talking about 3 routes you can take, but there's probably more than that you can take to get that data in your Oracle database and start using all of the powerful Oracle database features to build applications around that data. So if you've never seen those books before, ask your mom or dad about them. They were cool in like 1984.
Or you could cheat and go to both pages and see which outcome is better for you.
I would never say go to the end of the story where the person wins and then reverse engineer the book. That would take all the fun out, but maybe I did that. So the good news here, not to blow the lead, the good news is no matter which way you go, you're going to end up a winner. So no lost time today, I hope. There's tons of sample data out there. And if you want to go over to my blog and see what I have to say when I'm bored, when I'm talking about some of these features, you'll see that I've used some of my own personal data. Like, for example, Twitter allows you to download your personal data, and it's all of your tweets and all of the links and all of the images that you've posted and shared, all of the groups you've created, even all of your direct messages as a JSON dump. And I've used our technology to put that in an Oracle database. And suddenly I can use SQL, which I know very, very well, to find tweets that I tweeted, 8 years ago with specific keywords in it. I've done something similar with my untapped data, which is like a personal diary for people that like to try different kinds of beer and share how much they liked it or not. This data that you're seeing on the screen, Brian found, and it's about 4,500 JSON documents that tracks things like cancellations, delays, weather events around commercial air traffic in the US for like 5 or 6 year period. So if someone were to give you this information and say, hey, we need to put a nice UI over this, or hey, we need to build some sort of mini data warehouse over, and so people can start asking the questions they need to ask. If you've been using Oracle database for as long as we have, your natural inclination is, okay, well, let's go put that in a table and just run SQL straight over it. So I'm going to show you how you can do that. But if you have been exposed to the NoSQL crowd, or you've seen things out there like Mongo that bring this approach where you have a JSON document and you kind of have this schema on read thing where you can add attributes at any point and have super flexible patterns in your data. And gosh forbid, no, you don't have to learn SQL. You just have to be able to manipulate sort of these JSON snippets that kind of represent what you want the data to look like. That's also very appealing. So we've built that functionality into the Oracle database. And we have all sorts of APIs around that. And we also have a really nice web interface to that. And so I'm going to show you a little bit of that as well. And like I said, I blew the lead earlier. So there's no wrong choice here. You can go either way. I think when someone like Brian, he's just been used to building data models, and we actually draw the pictures of the data before it ever goes into a database, and it's always a table. And everything's always strongly typed. And yes, we do have relations and integrity constraints, and we are writing joins a lot. It feels very weird not just to jump straight to page 11. Pretty much any platform or programming language out there just natively speaks JSON. So that's appealing. It's easy for developers to use. The other thing that's appealing is you can publish changes to your data model, if you want to call it a data model. I think there always is a data model. And you'll have a hard time convincing me that I'm wrong, but it's very easy to make changes to that on the fly. As soon as you can post or put a document up, that data is there for your application to take advantage of. And so you're not worried about, getting the tables updated and the constraints disabled and indexes paused while you, go and do all that stuff. It's much more seamless and on the fly in that sense. And Oracle itself has recognized that benefit way back in the day with XML. If you go look at the plan table, there's a column in there called, I think I just call it Other XML. And if you look inside of it, it's just an XML document that allows the optimizer developers to put whatever sort of information in there they want. So as we go and add new optimizer features in the database and requires new sets of plan notes and hint display, it just gets chucked into that XML column. There's no new structural changes to the plan table required. And this is just that with JSON instead of XML. Some people also think that joins are bad. I'm not one of those people. But you can put things in these documents, like you can put objects inside the document. So this address object has 3 attributes in it. But I could also have an array of objects under addresses. We could have shipping address, home address, alternate address, or even just a running list of every address I've ever had. And if I ever wanted to have a page on my phone, show me that as a user, that's a single call to the API to get all the data back because it's there in that spot. Okay, that's enough on the JSON benefits. At Oracle, we want you to have your cake and we want you to be able to eat it too. So we want you to have all of the benefits of JSON, but we also want you to have all of the benefits of the Oracle database. So full ACID, your transactions are going to be durable, consistent. There's none of this, hey, I opened up my Instagram app and I saw that someone liked my photo and it tells me 3 people like the photo, but then when I go and click on the photo, it ends up like 27 people liked it. And when I go and look at it later, it says 12, None of that's going on here. Because all of the behavior you've expected for SQL and relational databases that Oracle's had around for like 40 plus years, all of that is also here for your JSON documents. So there's no compromise. You have full access to the complete SQL and PL/SQL libraries over JSON data, even if it's not being stored row by row, column by column in a table.
Somebody might have gotten, I personally saw this ACID transaction thing in play this holiday season, trying to shop for one of the new fangled Xboxes or PlayStation 5s at a certain retailer where, hey, the page said it was in stock. And I added it to my cart and it said, hey, you're ready to go. And then I went to check out and it said, it's not in stock. And then I went back to my cart and said, hey, it's in stock. And I went to the page and it said, it's not in stock. And then I went back to my cart and it said, it's in stock. And then I tried to check out and it said, it's not in stock. So that was a good time trying to get one of those without ACID transactions if that particular retailer had a document store database in the back end.
End of the day, Brian wanted his PlayStation 5. You did get it, right?
No.
No, sad story.
Only our manager has one.
That's a sad story. Okay. So, and other things here as well. So for example, if you're an Application Express developer into that low code stuff, yeah, you can drag and drop a widget in there and it speaks SOTA, which is this interface we've built for the JSON document store. And it can also use SQL and PL/SQL to interrogate the contents of those JSON documents, just like they were relational tables. So part of this having our cake and eating it too is what we call the converged database, which is sort of a new term you may have heard Oracle talking about over the last 2 years or so, but it's not a new thing. Like the converged database doesn't cost extra over the Oracle database. It is just our philosophy that we've had for the Oracle database for many years now. And it kind of started back when we introduced spatial and graph and JSON and XML and in-memory and all of the other things that the Oracle database provides. All of those things get equal treatment by the optimizer, by the SQL and PL SQL interfaces, by our REST APIs. So if you go out and you say, hey, give me the best graph database now, and you ignore the part where it shows the Oracle database is pretty darn good at graph, and you go off on something else, and then you decide 2 or 3 months later as your requirements change, hey, by the way, we need some nice spatial in here, and oh, by the way, we also have JSON documents to manage. That could be, hey, we got to start over and find a new database, or we pick up 2 new additional databases, and those databases are going to have different varying levels of security rules, encryption schemes supported, different levels of SQL support if they offer that. Even NoSQL databases offer a SQL, by the way. That's kind of fun. Whereas if you go with the Oracle Converged database, you get all of that in a single engine. So these white slides, by the way, are more of my marketing type slides, and the dark slides are more of the pure tech ones. So I do fully stand behind everything I just said in this slide, though. A little bit more here on just the value of using an Oracle database to store your JSON. And the second bullet point kind of goes to the idea behind this choose your own adventure. So you don't have to pick between a flat SQL table or a JSON document. You can actually store JSON documents as a column in your relational tables. And you can use similar syntax for interrogating and walking those nested arrays and objects in your SQL queries. And at the same time, yes, it's going to scale out. If you have this in a 16 node rack, or if you've got it in an Exadata, or if you've got it in a Oracle Autonomous, it's going to perform just as well as it would perform if it were, flat SQL tables, or even flat SQL tables with nested columns or whatever. All right, so on to the show. So we are going to start off with this JSON document, and actually, if you go look at the lab, there's one JSON file in the repo. It's like 7 or 8 megs, and it's got those 4,400 rows in it. Not rows. As a database person, you can only think in terms of rows. It's got 4,400 items in that array, which we're going to consider documents. So at this point, you could say, hey, I want to put that in a table, and let's just keep it to the SQL. Or we could do a hybrid of that. Hey, I've already got a table. Let's just add those documents as new columns in those tables. Or I want to go full NoSQL mode. I don't even want to pretend there's a table there, and just use these APIs to interact with my docs and the contents of my docs. We're going to go in sequential order. So let's go look at the flat table first. So the JSON that you're going to be given will not always look this clean or have this exact format. However, with a little bit of regex, search replace via Emac trickery, I've never not been able to take a JSON data source and not clean it up to fit what I need, even just by hand. Obviously, if you're ingesting this on a regular basis, you could write a little bit of bash probably and fix this up as needed so that our APIs can cleanly load it. So you've got a square bracket, which is an array, and then you've got documents that are started and opened by these JSON curly brackets. So I want to go from that, and I want to put it into a table, and we actually have a wizard for that. So our tool, or our interface that we're going to be using for the day, is today known as database actions, but it's also known as SQL Developer Web, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's that SQL Developer desktop tool that we've had out there for 15 plus years, has millions and millions of users, and we've ported it into like a single page web app that's serviced out of Oracle REST data services. And if you want to learn more about ORDs and database actions, then I have videos and blog posts and all of that stuff to learn about. Or you can also look at our calendar of events. Brian, is it May that we have another webcast set up to just cover database actions?
May 19th.
May 19th.
The SQL Developer, the next generation.
I bet he'll even put that in the Q&A as a link. But I have this SQL worksheet. It's got similar buttons and shortcuts as you would see in the desktop tool and similar output panels. If you click on this ellipsis button, there's something here called data loading. I can say upload data into new table. I can point to my JSON file. So it's like 7 some megs. This takes a few seconds. By the way, if you have a 15 gig file, be careful what you're asking your browser to do. Don't worry, there are other ways for us to get this data into your database, which I'm going to show you shortly. So the tool is like saying, okay, I'm able to parse your data. This is what it looks like. This is kind of what it would look like if it went into a table. So we have our column definition here. And we've kind of gone straight to this hybrid model where we have some table columns and we have some JSON documents. So instead of bringing in those objects or arrays of objects in as like a nested table column, we've said, hey, let's just keep that much as JSON. So in this implementation, we're bringing those columns in as clobs with an as JSON constraint. That constraint tells the database, hey, there's JSON data here, and that makes all of those JSON functions and features available. And I can give my table a name, and we never try to hide the code from you, so you can see, okay, this is how it's going to come in. And then I click finish, and it's going to go. I've already done that, and I can come here to my data loading tab, and I can see, yeah, 4,408 rows. It took like maybe 5-10 seconds to do this, so it's actually quite fast once that payload's taken up to the web server for us to process it. And now I can go query it in this airport underscore delays table. And then we can start doing the SQL things that we already know how to do. And we can also start taking advantage of some of the new JSON functions added to the SQL language to help you work with those JSON objects and arrays and nested upon nested upon nested upon nested versions of those things. That import feature I just showed you supports way more than just JSON. It also supports XML. So this is a really nice feature. So I've got non-flat data imported as flat as possible columns. Here is a more flat JSON document that comes in almost as a pure relational table. The only thing that's not brought in is this array of single attributes, or this array of single values that comes in. This is still technically JSON, by the way, but everything else comes in as a column. And then I can just do select star from this stuff. Please use better SQL than me. All right, so if we come back to Brian's lab, you're going to see kind of like a part 1 and a part 2. We're in the part 1. Here's that file that we're going to look at. If you do open it in a text editor, like VS Code, it might prompt you to open up a extension for JSON. And the more of these you have open, the more memory hoggy it's going to be. So if your machine starts to lag, it's just like Chrome. If you've got 57 tabs open, you don't want to have VS Code open with 400 JSON documents open. But the idea is, hey, we're going to take this data and we're going to put it into the table. And you've got a couple different storage options in the table. So varchar 2, don't recommend you use that unless you have a hard-coded requirement for a varchar 2 data type. primarily because eventually you're going to find a document that just doesn't fit. I think the average document I run into would probably fit in that 4K or 32K limit, but there will always be exceptions. And when you hit those, you don't want your apps to hit the wall and force application change. So a lot of people will go on to CLOB. CLOBs are convenient. It's almost like a magic varchar, although not quite. Unlimited in size, still fairly easy to work with in raw SQL. I have Blop here highlighted in this Oracle Redwood themed color. The JSON team says you're going to get much better performance over CLOB or CLOBs if you go with a binary lob or blobs. That's because there's no character conversion coming into play when you query this data. So there's no character set conversion or math happening as you bring the data out. It just gets streamed out pure binary. It's going to be much, much faster. And as far as running the SQL or even the SODA APIs against it, there's no sacrifice in convenience or features. All right, so those were sort of like our first go at JSON in the database. It was introduced in 12C, and it was sort of improved upon incrementally. 19C was like full feature set, except a few things missing, and people just really wanted a native JSON data type. So that's available with the 21C instance, which right now is only available if you're in the Oracle Cloud in the autonomous space. You can spin up a 21C autonomous JSON instance if you want. 21C is going to be released throughout the year. We have a meta link poster somewhere that kind of gives our whatever we're forecasting those releases to come out. It'll probably come out on Oracle Linux first and then eventually move out to the other platforms. Don't ask me when these are coming out, but you can go play with the 21C stuff right now if you go spin up that always free JSON instance, for example.
Here's a fun fact for you, Jeff, that 12C was released in way back in 2013.
I know. I still think of that as the new one. So if you follow Brian's wizard and you basically click OK, just like I did, you can start running queries against 3 of these standard number or string columns. And then you have these 2 CLOBs with the isJSON constraints attached to them. So if we want to get more interesting queries out of, like, hey, show me airports that were delayed by snow, or at least had 500 of them in a given month in this year, that's where we're going to have to learn a little bit new SQL. And it's very nice. Brian's written some really interesting queries against this data set to show the different techniques that you can go with. This is a simple dot notation. If I call it simple, but it's powerful. Minutes delayed is a nested JSON document. So the attribute is minutes delayed. It's part of the statistics attribute. So I can say statistics attribute dot minutes delayed dot carrier, and the SQL engine is smart enough to be able to spin through that CLOB that has this JSON document in it, and it'll look for a statistics attribute, a minutes delayed attribute, and this carrier attribute. And then all of the rest of the SQL looks exactly the same. So as you go through the lab, you can literally copy and paste those queries and put them into your SQL worksheet and run these. Now I've saved my worksheets with the names just so I can pull them up easily. You can do that as well, but every query that you run also goes into our SQL history panel. We've also recently updated the SQL Developer Web or Database Actions software itself. So the look and feel is much nicer. You can see I've got this dark themed mode. If you don't like that, you can come up here into preferences and say, hey, I'm not one of these goth kids. Give me give me the light back. And you can turn off these white space characters, and you can turn off the mini maps, and you can turn off the gutters. The other nice thing is the insight feature is greatly improved. So it's looking for things in the editor. It's looking for functions that you can call. It's not necessarily restricted to what we're getting back from the database. And it's very, very responsive. And I think it's just look and feel wise, it's a much more modern experience than even what we had 2 weeks ago. And we have all these similar features when we get to the straight up JSON interface as well. Here's a function called JSON value. And I'm saying, hey, let's go into this JSON document and look for flights canceled. And if we go look in the CLOB, we can see the raw text, and eventually we get down in here and see that flights canceled attribute. And it gets pulled out and it just shows up in my query. Similar dot notation. This $sign is like a placeholder wildcard. So basically everything's going to resolve to that. Here's a feature called JSON table, which says take some JSON and bring it back to look like a table. So I can go from this list of attributes and have it come back as a list of columns. So, you could create views using this, which I'll talk about in a second, and give those views to your end users. They never even know at the end of the day how their data is being stored, because it just comes back as rows and columns. And, of course, that goes straight into Excel and their day doesn't change any, but you all have a much more flexible life because you can add stuff on the fly and, no one's the wiser. Here's where it gets to be a little bit more fun. So, by the way, I'm showing selects. These could easily be inserts, updates, deletes, merges. Like I said, the full power of the SQL libraries in here, and we're just showing a small piece of it. So here I have, again, the statistics attribute, and inside of that, I've got an attribute called carriers, and then aircraft types. And under aircraft types, I have an array, and that array has another array in it. I've got like the make of plane, and then all of the models of those planes that are involved. So when we look at the models array, I'm saying, hey, all of these models, 0, 1, that's the positional values of those arrays. So I'm saying grab the first 2 items out of the array. This would only make sense if you just wanted to like have a preview of the data. If for some strange reason those attributes were ordered in here in a certain way, I would think this would be a good preview thing. Like just peek in there and see what's in there. If you had an asterisk here, it brings back the entire array. And in fact, I think if you go look at Brian's example, he had an asterisk, and I just changed it to 0, 1 to show you the flexibility of the patterns that you can put into your SQL to get the data out the way you want. And this is saying where ID equals 100. So this is for a single row. And there's no reason why you couldn't bring this out for as many rows as you want. All right, so that was the SQL portion of our show. Gosh, I'm talking way too slow. So we're going to go over to the JSON side. Again, I'm dating myself a little here with this movie. Great movie. And we're going to talk about simple Oracle document access, which almost everyone at Oracle just goes straight to SOTA. And this is the collection of APIs that makes the JSON document store feature in the Oracle database work. So these are your platforms available for building the applications around. Java app, no problem. Complete Java, JDBC driver support there. Same with C, same with Python, even for Node.js, which opens up the world for JavaScript. Hey, what if I'm not using one of those programming languages? I'm using Go, or I'm using, I don't know, Ada 2020, if there is such a thing. Well, your get out of jail free card is the REST APIs, because pretty much every programming language in the world also speaks REST. So I'm going to go over a little bit of each of these and primarily focus on the user interface that we built into database actions to work with these JSON docs. All right, so the JSON document store, surprise, end of the day, we're still putting your documents into tables. Didn't want to burst your bubble. But we're managing those tables for you. You will never issue a create table command. We're handling all of that for you. Instead, you have this SODA API that you make calls to. The database gets those, does the database work, figures out what the SQL is to get what you want, does that, and then brings it back to you. All right, so that's the beauty of it. You don't have to worry about the tables or the SQL. You just make these very simple and easy API calls to work with your documents or the data in those documents. So instead of writing where this equals that, these are what we call, we love our acronyms at Oracle. So if you ever see SODA QBE, that's the document store API query by example. And you have these different types of predicates and order by clauses that you can build. So you're basically it's kind of like SQL. You're not telling the database how to go get the stuff. You're just kind of describing what the data should look like. Select star from is open bracket, close bracket. And if you run that query, that filter basically says, don't filter anything, show me everything. And then anything that you put in here, in addition to that, is like, well, give me everything but this, or only this, or order it by this. This syntax you'll see used all over by the different APIs and drivers that we provide. I'm not a Java developer. I know there are some. So again, if you're using Java, all of that is there. I'm not going to touch on the Python and the Node.js. You can go check out the docs for that if you want, and I have a link to that at the end. Okay, so the command line interface, SQL CL. So this is our quick and easy command line interface for the Oracle database. There's actually a SODA command built into SQL CL. You can say, what can I say? I can say SODA create Bob, and then I'm going to have a collection named Bob, and then I can say SODA insert Bob and give it the file, and it's going to put those it's going to put that JSON into my Bob collection for me. And then, like I said, it's a table at the end of the day. So if you go look in your schema, there will be a table in there called Bob with either a blob, a clob, or a JSON data type column in there with that data in there for you. Yeah, I can even run queries here directly in SQL CL. So I can say SODA find pop. So I created a collection called pop. Isn't that funny? SODA pop, ha ha ha. And here's one of those QBEs. I'm saying look for text that starts with the letter T. And text starts with the letter T. That resolved, so that came back. If you're new, never heard of SQL CL, we introduced this, I think, in like 2015. We took everything that you loved with SQL Plus. We took everything that you loved with SQL Developer, put those together, and then fixed all of the things you didn't like about SQL Plus. And if you want to learn more about SQL CL, I've got videos, blog posts. They're easy to find. We've got some folks on Twitter that love SQL CL and even written books and have sessions and presentations on it, your local Oracle user groups. So if you can't find any of that stuff, always feel free to ping me and happy to send it over to you. Also easy to get installed. So if you're in the Oracle Cloud, it's there by default. You just open up that Cloud Shell panel in your browser and you can type SQL and you're immediately able to connect to any database in your Oracle tenancy. No need to get an Oracle client. No need to mess with all of the library path and installer requirements on your machines. You just unzip and go. Okay, so that's the command line interface. And to be honest, I don't use it all that much. I'm using more the web interface. And the only reason the web interface is possible is because there's a complete REST API interface built into SODA. So I can do a put on the SODA endpoint and create a collection. I can do a post on that endpoint and kind of put records into it, or if they're already there, update those records, and of course get the records out, and of course delete them, and yada yada yada. So if you want to go into the Oracle SODA for REST docs, all of these APIs are fully described with examples. So to build this lab, Brian and I both started with this 4,500 document array, which is a single file. And don't you know it? There's an endpoint that says, hey, let me post this file to this collection, airport delays collection, because we're not the most creative here. But there's a parameter called action equals insert. And that says take each of those items in the array and put them in as individual documents. So if you look at the response, it's not a 201 because we didn't create one object. We created like 4,400. And the response payload is a list of those documents that were created. So they're primary key ID. Yes, even your JSON documents have primary keys. And a couple of other metadata type attributes. The actual JSON content's not in there because that wouldn't make sense to put. So this is just a REST client I'm using, but this is what the curl would look like. All right, so since we have these REST APIs, we were able to use those to build a nice modern web interface to the JSON features in the Oracle database. So I can do this on my on-prem Oracle database, or this is there out of the box for my Oracle Autonomous instance. So kind of like that SQL worksheet on the left, you've got a list of collections, you select one, and then you can start running these QBEs or these filtered expressions to get just the data back that you want. Once it's back, you can make changes to it, you can download it, you can upload new documents, it's full CRUD, anything you want. We even save your searches for you, and we have the nice insight feature. So I think that's a good segue for me to show you a little bit of that live.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how useful that feature is that Jeff's going to show here about the type ahead and being able to search, because sometimes you're trying to get at an array or a JSON node that's way, way, way down, and you just don't know how to get to it. And this just pops it right here, and it'll show you exactly how and what you can do to get to it. It's so useful and so.
So I typed Tim, not because I'm trying to give a shout out to Tim Hall, who I should, because he has lots of awesome documents on Oracle Base describing this stuff. But Tim as in time, we see that there's this time nested document in here, and it's offering to let me bring up the different attributes. So time, month, name. And then I can say May. So I haven't tried this one before. Hopefully it works. There's my Mays. All right, well, maybe we want to do an order by. Add clause, order by. All right, so this just got a lot more complicated, but don't let it scare you. Again, this is a web interface to use the SODA APIs against your JSON docs. You're not really going to be using this as an end user. This is sort of like a debug, go play with the raw data sort of interface. Remember, what your users are going to be using to get to this data are the applications you build for them. And those applications are going to be powered by API calls that look like this. So this is a good way to kind of test those out before you commit them to your project. So I'm going to order this. Now see here, it's looking for path. So let's say I want to order that by time year. And time year is a number. I do need to, since this is JSON and not an actually properly typed column, I'm giving a hint to the database. Hey, by the way, that's a number. And I'm going to say DSC as to send. And then I'm going to run this query again. And I've got May, and it looks like the most recent up-to-date information we have in there was for 2015. So this is just a sample preview of the results, and these are paged. I think we paged them in batches of 101. So if I scroll long enough, it's going to go grab another 100 or so. And these are previews. If I double click here, it brings up a full screen editor of the JSON document itself. You can see this little mini map here, so you can kind of see just how big this document is. If this weren't already formatted, you could hit this button and we make it pretty print for you. I can import a new document in here to replace this, which would basically be doing a put. Or I can download this as a local file, or I can just make a live change in here. I don't know. What's your favorite Boeing make, Brian?
Included all the good ones.
All the good ones.
To put a 707. Don't get one of those.
Dun, dun, dun. Save. Boop, updated. So that one document in the collection was updated. These documents are kind of complicated, not super complicated to be honest, but a little complicated than the average JSON doc I found out there on the web. So there's a nice feature in here. You can actually ask for a bit of an ER diagram showing you how this thing is made up. So you can kind of see how the different docs kind of come and play together in here. I love that feature. I use it all the time. I make pictures and I post it as wallpaper in my cube, and that's how lonely and sad I am. If you're going to go create a new collection from scratch, just click this new button, give this the name. And then down here, there's tons of attributes you can pay attention to, but you don't need to. You can just hit create. But if you're on 21C, you could say, yes, let's take advantage of that JSON data type. Or you could say, for some reason, I'm going to stick with varchar2. And you can even actually name that column in the table if you really, really want to. Again, you don't need to go and do any of this. You really you just provide the name. So the API for creating collections can be super, super simple, but if you have very esoteric specific requests, then you can make those. I wanted to do more live demo, but I didn't time this well. So I already kind of showed you the query by example filtering, which take our word for it, you will really love this feature. We use it a ton, especially for these function calls. Once you get the gist of these, you'll need them less and less, but I think you'll still use it anyway. I just said two contrary things. I think you'll get used to reading it and the flow of it, but this insight feature is like the best thing we've done in the last 2 years, as far as I'm concerned. Coming soon, this isn't live in the product now. If you come back later this summer, like I said, best of both worlds, you should be able to do JSON and SQL, or SQL and JSON. And I told you, like the SOTA brains is really abstracting the SQL for you, and it just lets you treat everything as documents. And I said these are still being stored in tables. Well, what's the SQL behind these calls? Okay, well, we're going to have a SQL button in our next update that doesn't matter how complicated your queries get, we're going to show you the actual SQL. I had baby did a bad thing. So let's pull up one of my history items. So here is the SQL query that would go and get us that data, and the fun stuff is over here. So if I were to copy this and take it over to a SQL worksheet and supply the bind variable values, I'm good to go. So even if the developers insist on using the JSON features and you're the old school SQL person like me and Brian, you can use this interface to go get the SQL for you and go run it. The other whiz-bang feature that's coming, by the way, this isn't a new feature provided by the SOTA team. This is just a new interface we're putting into the editor. So for your documents, hey, why not build a relational view over these things so you can write super simple SQL against it. So again, have your cake and you get to eat it. So you still have the full SOTA API QBE interfaces, but you've also got this view over top of it. So you pick the attributes that you want, you pick the column names that you want. We generate that SQL for you. You run that SQL, and then you can go run your queries against it. I said SOTA plus SQL. It's like a shake. I don't know. That was like the best shake emoji I could find. I didn't think SOTA plus SQL would make a very good cake, so I went with shake.
A red Solo cup with a straw.
I know, but that kind of works for me too. That works for my persona.
There's nothing in a red Solo cup that you want to drink with a straw.
Well, it gets better over time. That's the end of our presentation. I went very shallow on what Brian built in the labs. Take a screenshot of this page, especially the QR code. That's going to get you those hundreds of dollars of OCI credits that you can spend on anything in the Oracle Cloud. Our colleague did an amazing session earlier this week that went way more into the techie bits of, just what does that JSON. Josh Spiegel did that on Monday. I think that's the recording for this. If you're interested in the performance benefits of using the JSON storage format in 21C, that's a great talk to go see.
I'm throwing that in the chat too, so if you want to go watch.
You're not going to be able to click these, but everyone always asks, Jeff, do you have the slides? Do you have the slides? Do you have the slides? Yes, I'm going to post the slides, and then those links will be live in these slides. So I've written dozens and dozens of posts on using the different JSON features in our tools, covers this. The real expert, Beta Hammerschmidt, he's the Oracle architect responsible for the JSON features in the Oracle database. If you go to blogsoracle.com, you can find his posts. I usually read those to figure out those funky or weird to me SQL strings. The SOTA product page has links to the docs and to the different library sets for the drivers. And our friends over at Live SQL have actually built a nice tutorial for using the PL SQL SOTA API to work with JSON docs. All right. I think, Brian, I left you 5 minutes to show off your lab if you want.
Great. Let me really quick show it. We got a few people hanging on to the end here, which is excellent. But let's just talk about the lab. So Jeff did go over a lot of what we put together for this lab. But again, we have the lab link in the chat if you want to take a look at that, and we'll post it in many other places as well. But this lab and all the labs that I actually do, as we talked about in the very beginning here, this lab was done with an always free service. So all the labs I do are always with the always free database, so that the experience you're going to have is going to be great. So for example, we have this Dev Live coming out next week. We have a whole set of labs on that talk about REST enabling your database. But with that lab, we show you how to batch load 2 million rows in about 20 seconds. And we just mounted it, and it works perfectly fine, quite good on the always free service. So again, all these labs are built on that. So you don't have to buy anything to be able to do these labs. And as Jeff also said, you can do these labs on any database on premises that you wanted to do, even with our VM developer instance you can download. But the lab actually does, as we said, goes over exactly what we talked about today. So loading the data from the that REST using that service. Let me bring this down a little bit. There we go. Loading the data from SQL Developer Web, that worksheet, and how to do that. And we're actually taking that JSON data, and here you right click it and save it off. And you can use that data right into this UI. And again, it shows you exactly what Jeff showed. But the second half of this lab is about going over working with that data. So there's actually things you can actually copy and paste. You just hit this copy button. It copies it to your copier, whatever your what is it, the buffer, your OS buffer,
Clipboard.
what have you.
Clipboard, I think.
Clipboard, that's what it is. Yes, the clipboard.
The copier.
Clippy. It goes to the copy machine and it spits it out, and then you have to bring it back to your desk and type it in. It's very, very efficient. But you use this and you can just throw it directly right into whatever you're working with, so you don't have to worry about typing it. But yeah, so we go over the dot notation, and then we go over actually all the different ones. So JSON transform, which is a 21C, and which is 21C is also available at the always free service. So if you are using an always free, use the 21C. It's the best way to do it. And apparently I forgot a asterisk in this, so I got to go fix that. But yeah, exactly. So we go over what Jeff went over, the JSON query, the JSON value, the JSON table. We actually go a little bit further, and we actually do a pivot. So we do a pivot with this. So you can actually take the data and pivot it, which is right here. So we take those arrays and we pivot them on the side using that JSON table. So that's kind of a cool thing you can learn how to do. And then the second half, which is the JSON working with a document store, is the same thing. So what we have is we have creating the collection, two ways to create the collection. We can use the SOTA APIs, or we can use the UI, loading the data into the collection. So we show you how to build up that SOTA URL and take the docs and directly load it into your JSON collection with this. And then lastly, working with the data. So here are a whole bunch of the QBEs that Jeff went over, and we kind of build up the queries and show you how to go a little bit from less complex to more complex. Here's all the the comparison operators we have, and we go into nots and greater thans and a whole bunch of things, so you can get back what we have. And then we actually show you what you would do as an application developer. So here are the QBEs you would do, and the action is query, and you just jam that that JSON right into the QBE, and we can get back the documents that match that. And that's how you would use it for a typical application. But we do have the last lab, which is the sixth part, which actually goes through exposing this data. So we already showed you how to expose that data via the SOTA, but we actually go through auto rest enabling a table. So if you are going that relational route, you can basically left click on a table, hit auto rest, and now that table is rest enabled for you to use with your applications, and it will spit back that JSON for you to use, whether, like Jeff said, it's Go or Xcode or Node.js or whatever newfangled front end comes out this week. It all speaks JSON, so we can expose that data to there. And this lab walks you through doing all of this step by step. Hopefully it's very easy to go. And if you have any questions or issues with it, let us know and we'll fix it, or give you a little hint on what's going on, because it may be new. And again, as Jeff and I said, this JSON stuff is a little new to a lot of folks, and working with it is actually pretty easy, and you can really see the advantages and power of it very, very quickly just by running through this lab. So that's pretty much it. Jeff, do you have any parting thoughts or anything to say at the end here?
I talked for an hour. Was that not enough, Brian?
Excellent. Well, again, thanks everyone for attending. We'll have all this stuff posted out to our YouTube channel. The labs are available on Live Labs, and the slides will be available. Jeff will blog about it as in the next probably 3 minutes, and have all that ready to go. And you can take a look at that, download it. And again, ask us any questions. Reach us on Twitter, reach us on our Discord channel, reach us on email. We're very, very available, and very easy to get a hold of as well.